They laughed as if I were invisible, but I heard every word. The dining room was dressed in warmth, crystal lights humming above, laughter folding into the walls like old wallpaper. My name was Margaret. 62 years lived, and this house still felt like both cradle and cage. I'd come back after 20 years, holding nothing but an invitation that smelled faintly of dust and guilt. My brother Richard sat at the head of the table, the same place Father once commanded. His wife poured wine with the confidence of someone who never feared being judged. The oak table glistened as if the years hadn't passed. Silverware chimed against plates, and in that rhythm I found my heartbeat. A soft scent of roast chicken mixed with the faint echo of perfume, Mother's old brand, now worn by my niece. I reached for my napkin, folded precisely as Father taught us to, and listened. "Some people just don't fit into families," my niece said, giggling. Her voice sliced the air cleanly. Richard joined in, pretending to cough to hide his laugh. "Still unmarried at your age, Maggie? You've outlived the patience of good men." Their laughter rolled around me like thunder. I didn't speak. Silence, I've learned, is the most disciplined kind of anger. I smiled, careful and small, while inside, something long buried began to stir. The photograph wall behind them gleamed. Weddings, children, promotions. My frame was missing. It used to hang just beside Father's. They must have taken it down when I left. The realization burned, quiet and steady, under my ribs. I reached for my glass, the stem cool and trembling against my fingers. "You've redecorated," I said softly. Richard raised his glass, smirking. "We had to. Too many ghosts in this house." His wife chuckled. "Especially the ones who never settled down." The sound filled every corner like smoke. I looked at the old clock ticking above the mantel, its pendulum swinging steady and cruel. I wondered if Father could hear it where he rested, his rules, his fairness, the balance he preached. This family had learned to weaponize memory. A sudden gust outside rattled the window panes. My heart followed its rhythm, erratic but alive. I watched the flicker of candlelight dance over their faces, faces I once trusted, faces that now performed joy like theater. "Do you remember," I said, voice low but clear, "how Father made us all promise to stay kind, no matter who succeeded him?" Richard's smile faltered, just slightly. "Oh, we remember plenty, Maggie." "Good," I whispered, folding my napkin carefully. "Then you'll remember me." My words landed like a whisper, but I could feel the tremor it caused. A faint vibration traveled through the room, the kind that comes before glass breaks. My niece looked uneasy, her laughter thinning into air. I pressed my palm flat against the table's grain, feeling its warmth fade beneath my skin. The scent of the roast had turned heavy, cloying. I heard the hum of the chandelier, the static crackle of a voice recorder someone had left on the sideboard to capture the family moments. The irony wasn't lost on me. Evidence, I thought. Every cruelty recorded, whether by accident or intent. Richard clinked his glass again. "To family," he declared. The others echoed, "To family." But I didn't raise mine. My reflection in the glass showed a woman carved by restraint, not time. In that reflection, I saw the faintest shimmer of resolve. I looked toward the old photograph of Father on the far wall. His eyes, stern yet kind, seemed to meet mine. The oak beneath my fingertips pulsed with memory, the warmth motif of every meal, every lesson, every unspoken rule. Something cracked open inside me then, not loud but permanent. It wasn't the sound of breaking. It was the quiet, deliberate sound of decision. "They laughed as if I were invisible," I murmured under my breath, but I heard every word. The candle flickered, throwing shadows that stretched like long fingers over the tablecloth. My heart steadied. Somewhere in the house, the clock struck 9, each chime cutting through laughter like judgment. That night, as they talked and drank, I memorized every detail, their tones, their smiles, the way guilt disguised itself as joy. My vow formed between breaths, sharp and silent. That night, I began my quiet war. The silence after laughter felt like a verdict. The house, moments ago echoing with noise, now held its breath. I stood alone in the hallway, the air thick with roast, perfume, and memory. The clock's tick crawled through the stillness, each second colder than the last. I could still hear their voices faintly, laughter fading like smoke after a fire. My brother's words repeated in my head, cruel and casual, as if they hadn't shattered something sacred. I walked toward the portrait wall. Father's face looked down on me from behind the glass, the same stern kindness frozen in sepia. Beneath the frame, something caught my eye, a thin corner of paper peeking from the edge of the backing. My pulse quickened. I reached behind the frame and pulled out a yellowed envelope. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. To my children, if ever fairness is questioned. My fingers trembled. The faint scent of cedar ink drifted up, the same ink Father always used when writing his ledgers. It carried me back to evenings when he'd sit at his desk, glasses low on his nose, reminding us that honesty was the only inheritance worth keeping. My throat tightened. Those lessons hadn't survived him. The wax seal cracked softly as I opened the letter. The paper rustled like old breath. I read his words slowly, tracing each loop and stroke as though I could feel him there. He wrote of dividing the estate equally, of wanting peace among us. "Do not let laughter become cruelty," one line read. I closed my eyes. They had read this too once and ignored it. The faint aroma of cedar lingered on my hands. I pressed my fingers to my face, inhaling the ghost of his discipline, his care. A mirror hung opposite the portrait, and I saw myself in it, older, harder, yet still his daughter. "They've taken what you built," I whispered to the reflection. The candlelight behind me flickered across the glass, turning my image into something fractured. I thought of Richard's smirk, his wife's eyes glinting with quiet triumph, and my niece's laughter echoing through the table's shine. That letter was proof, not of wealth, but of betrayal. They'd buried his last wish like it was an inconvenience. Now I understood why no one mentioned the will again. It hadn't been lost. It had been deliberately erased from memory, from conversation, from record. A floorboard creaked behind me. My old friend and protector, David, stepped from the doorway. He'd known our family since his youth, the kind of man who still believed in decency even when the world didn't. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said gently. "They'll come looking." "I'm not hiding anymore," I replied, folding the letter carefully. "I found what they didn't want found." He glanced at the paper, then at me. "You're stirring ghosts." "Maybe ghosts are all I have left to stand beside me," I said, voice steady. The scent of cedar rose again as I slid the letter into my coat pocket. It was more than paper. It was truth that breathed. David stepped closer. "What are you going to do with it?" I hesitated, staring at Father's face in the frame. "I'll decide after I sleep," I lied. But even as I said it, I knew sleep wouldn't come. That letter wasn't meant to rest again. It was meant to surface. I turned toward the staircase, light spilling from the hall lamp, cutting across the envelope's edge. Each step down felt heavier, as if the house itself protested my discovery. Halfway down I paused, looking back at the portrait. "You warned us," I murmured. "You knew what they'd become." The walls seemed to absorb my words. Outside, wind swept through the trees, carrying faint echoes of laughter that no longer sounded warm. I placed the letter inside my handbag, next to my father's old pen, two relics of integrity in a house that had forgotten what it meant. Downstairs, the table was still cluttered with half-empty glasses, napkins crumpled like fallen flags. I brushed my hand over one of them, a folded napkin still holding the imprint of my grip from dinner. It felt like a promise. I realized then that this wasn't about inheritance. It was about restoration, about balance, about memory reclaiming its rightful space. I blew out the candle and watched smoke curl upward. the scent of wax mingling with the faint cedar that clung to my fingers. The mirror caught the last flicker before darkness swallowed the room. Somewhere inside that silence, made a vow to my father's ghost. The will they buried wasn't lost. It was erased. Dust carries more truth than polished smiles. The air in the attic was heavy and dry, filled with the scent of forgotten years. Every step stirred a cloud that shimmered briefly before dissolving back into quiet. I hadn't been up here since Father died. The old rafters creaked like bones, remembering their purpose. It was supposed to be just another room of memories, but something called me further in, a pull between curiosity and dread. The small window let in a narrow blade of sunlight, cutting through the dim. It landed on a corner where the boards didn't quite meet. There, half hidden beneath a drop cloth, I saw it. A cedar chest, its brass lock rusted but intact. The key hung from a nail beside it, as if someone had intended to return soon and never did. My fingers closed around the key, cold, heavy, honest. The chest opened with a sigh, releasing the faint scent of paper and dust, something like the inside of old books. Beneath a layer of linen rested a folder bound with twine. My heart thudded as I untied it. Inside lay the deed. Father's signature elegant and steady, the date written neatly, 2 decades past. My name appeared beside his, half of the estate listed in equal measure. But where my siblings' signatures should have been, there was only blank space. Someone had removed them, torn the truth out by hand. For a moment, all I could hear was the whisper of paper against my skin, texture, real and accusing. My fingertips traced the embossed seal, half cracked, as though history itself had been pried open. They didn't just take my inheritance. They erased acknowledgement that I ever mattered. I folded the paper carefully, pressing the crease the way Father once showed me when filing important records. "Always treat paper like it has a heartbeat," he'd say. I smiled bitterly. He was right. This paper was alive, and it was bleeding proof. I reached for my phone and called someone who had once been loyal to our family, the notary who'd overseen Father's documents. He picked up on the third ring. His voice sounded older, cautious. "You shouldn't be calling about that, Margaret," he said. "I found the original deed," I told him quietly. "Half the property is mine." He went silent for a long moment. I could hear faint shuffling, the sound of a match being struck, perhaps nerves finding a ritual. Finally he sighed. "I remember everything. Your father signed it in this very town hall 2003, but your brother came back later with an amended copy, said you'd forfeited your share." My grip tightened on the phone. "Did I sign anything?" "You didn't," he whispered. "But they had a document with your name printed at the bottom. No signature. I asked questions, and soon after, they stopped hiring me." I looked down at the paper again, light brushing the faded ink. "Would you testify if needed?" "I'll confirm I witnessed the original, but they have power now, Margaret. They'll bury you before they admit what they took." His words hung like dust in sunlight, visible, fragile, impossible to ignore. I ended the call, staring at the open chest. The linen inside looked like burial cloth. Maybe it was. Maybe they'd buried the truth here years ago, under layers of dust and guilt. I slipped the deed into a folder marked Legal Archive Reference A71. It felt wrong to put something so sacred into a file, but the system needed to see proof, not sentiment. As I sealed the envelope, I felt the roughness of the paper, its dry strength against my thumb. That texture stayed with me, like the feel of a scar. The attic light dimmed as a cloud passed outside. My eyes adjusted slowly to the gloom. I noticed more things now. A ledger missing from the shelf, a drawer slightly ajar, empty where records once sat. They hadn't been careless. They'd been precise, surgical. I sat on the floor, back against the chest, and let the silence press against me. Below, the house was still, pretending innocence. Above, dust drifted through the sunlight in slow, graceful betrayal. I thought of the laughter at dinner, the way their smiles never reached their eyes. How easily they lied when they thought history had forgotten me. But history hadn't. Paper doesn't forgive. It waits. I rose, brushing dust from my coat. The rusted key was still warm from my hand. I left it hanging again, exactly as I'd found it. Some things needed to look untouched, for now. As I reached the stairs, the last beam of light caught the folded deed in my bag, glowing faintly like an ember. I paused, one hand on the railing, feeling a pulse of resolve that matched my heartbeat. I held proof older than their lies. Greed doesn't shine, it cuts. The phrase pulsed through my mind as I sat across the desk from the young clerk. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, nervous, uncertain. The sterile hum of the bank's air conditioning filled the silence. I could almost hear the sound of numbers moving, mechanical, cold, precise. The light above us flickered once, landing sharp against the glass of the counter, then steadied again. "I just need the records under account reference B92, I said quietly. She looked at me, then at the screen. Her hesitation said enough. "Is there a problem?" I asked. She swallowed. "Those are restricted. Family accounts, legal hold. I'll need clearance." "Then use mine," I replied, sliding across a folded authorization copy, the same document I'd filed through the estate office last week. She checked it, nodded, and typed. A few seconds later, the printer behind her whirred to life. Sheets of white fed through, each one stamped with my brother's initials. 4 transactions. Each withdrawal bled off the page like confession lines. $12,000, $18,000, $9,000, $6,000. Total $45,000. All withdrawn before probate ever closed. The ink was blue, still sharp, as though it had waited years to be seen. I stared at the numbers, the rhythm of greed hiding behind their symmetry. The reflection of the overhead light trembled over the glossy paper like something alive. I whispered, "He took more than money. He took the story Father left behind." The clerk's eyes darted toward me. "Should I print copies?" "Yes, 2. My voice came steadier than I felt. When she handed them over, the edges caught the light again, cutting my palm with their stiffness. I slid them carefully into a folder. The name on the folder's tag read, Probate Records. County Reference 71A. The officialness of it soothed nothing. At the county office, the arbiter waited, an older man with silver glasses and the kind of tone reserved for unpleasant truths. He took the documents from me, spreading them across his desk beneath the glow of a small desk lamp. The light reflected in his lenses, turning his eyes into 2 round mirrors. He read in silence for a while before exhaling softly. "You realize," he said, "that what you're showing me isn't just irregular. It's illegal if proven intentional." "It was intentional," I said. "Look at the timing. Every withdrawal before Father's estate was even read." He adjusted the lamp, the glow sliding over the figures like a slow spotlight. "And you have proof these were his actions, not misfiled transactions. His initials match, his access code, and the signature authorization attached." He tapped one page with a pen. "This could ruin him." I met his gaze. He already ruined himself. For a moment, he just studied me. "You could still withdraw your complaint, keep it within the family." "Discretion?" I asked. "That's what everyone keeps suggesting." "Sometimes," he said gently, "silence spares blood." I folded the papers back into the folder. "Silence is what let this happen." He leaned back, sighing. "I'll log the file under interim review. Officially, I'm noting it as a financial discrepancy. Reference entry D104. You'll be contacted." His words were cautious, bureaucratic, but beneath them I caught something else. Warning. He wasn't wrong. This would start a fire that couldn't be undone, but I'd already stood too long in their shadows. As I left his office, the hallway windows threw sunlight against the walls. The reflection followed me, fractured by glass panels, flashing in rhythmic bursts. Each flash felt like the pulse of a promise. I would not be erased again. Outside, I stopped at a cafe across the street. The first sip of wine from the glass tasted metallic, sharp, like the truth itself. I looked at my reflection in the surface. The glass cracked faintly along its base, a perfect mirror to what lay inside me. $45,000, I whispered. He thought numbers couldn't speak. I folded the cassette statement again, the paper creasing under my fingers like a living thing. It wasn't just evidence. It was memory finally written in ink, proof that greed leaves fingerprints on everything it touches. I thought of Father's handwriting on the old deed, his final wish for fairness. He believed legacy was measured in honesty. Richard measured it in profit. The sunlight shifted, catching the corner of the statement, throwing one sharp gleam into my eyes. For the first time, I didn't look away. Let the light burn. Let it remember what they'd done. He forgot. Paper remembers what mouths deny. He smiled as he locked the door behind me. The sound of the bolt sliding into place echoed through the marble corridor, sharp and final. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and polished floors, that sterile mix of authority and indifference. I clutched the folder against my chest, the case file I'd spent nights assembling, every document in order, every reference marked cleanly. My breath fogged the glass pane between us as I waited at the counter. The clerk didn't look up right away. He shuffled through forms with slow, deliberate motions, as if time belonged to him alone. When he finally spoke, his tone was smooth, detached. "You're missing documentation." I frowned. "I'm not. Everything required is here. The notice of claim, property deed, proof of withdrawal, notarized copy. It's all listed." He adjusted his glasses, pretending to read. "Then perhaps you're missing authorization. It's a complicated case. Family disputes usually are." The words hit with the weight of dismissal. "You mean my name?" I said softly. "You saw it and decided to stop reading." He didn't answer, but I caught the flicker in his eyes, recognition mixed with discomfort. "Procedures must be followed," he muttered. "You'll need approval from the head clerk." "That's you," I said. He hesitated, then placed the folder on the desk without touching it further. "Then I'm denying it," he said, voice firm but trembling slightly. My palms pressed to the counter. The marble was cold beneath my skin, the chill climbing through me like static. "On what grounds?" "Lack of clearance," he said simply. "Your family name is already flagged in the system. We don't want conflict within probate records." Conflict. As if what they did wasn't theft, but inconvenience. I watched him stamp other documents carelessly for the line behind me, granting approvals as if my presence had contaminated the air. My throat tightened, but I refused to show anger. Anger made them feel righteous. Calm frightened them more. "You're protecting someone," I said quietly. He looked up then, startled. "I'm protecting the institution." "No," I whispered. "You're protecting power. There's a difference." The moment stretched thin, the silence loud enough to make him shift in his chair. His hand brushed the folder again, almost apologetic, before pulling back. "I can't stamp it," he said. "You'll have to appeal through the main office." "Which will take months," I replied. "You know that." He gave a small shrug. "Then you have time to think." The door behind me clicked open as someone else entered, and a gust of cold air swept through. My hair lifted slightly in the draft. I caught the faint sound of a key turning again as he locked the file cabinet beside him. Another gesture of control, quiet and deliberate. When I stepped outside, the afternoon had turned gray. The courthouse steps gleamed with a thin sheen of rain, the air biting and metallic. Autumn had arrived overnight, stripping warmth from everything it touched. My fingers tingled as I tightened my coat around me. The folder clutched close like a fragile heart. The cold helped me think. The institution wasn't broken. It was functioning exactly as it was built, to protect those who already held power. The gatekeeper wasn't cruel by nature. He was complicit by habit. His denial wasn't personal. It was policy. I walked to the iron railing overlooking the square. Below, a group of law interns smoked under the awning, their laughter rising through the drizzle. The sound reminded me of that night at the family table. How easily people could laugh while something sacred burned quietly behind them. I opened the folder once more, the paper inside slightly damp from condensation. The embossed court seal on the cover caught the weak light and seemed to pulse, faint but alive. I ran my thumb across it, feeling the raised texture. It felt like resistance and promise all at once. "This isn't over," I whispered to no one. "You locked one door. There are others." My phone buzzed. A message from David, my protector. "How did it go?" I typed back. "He refused the filing, but I know where the cracks are now." 3 dots blinked, then disappeared. The reply never came. Maybe he didn't need to answer. The truth was simple. I was done, waiting for permission to be heard. A gust of wind swept through the street, carrying a swirl of dry leaves that skittered across the courthouse steps. I watched them spin, caught between directions before settling near the drain. Even the air seemed to know what it was like to be trapped between power and proof. The rain began again, steady this time. I turned up my collar and walked away, the courthouse shrinking behind me. Somewhere inside, a key turned in another lock, sealing my file in a drawer marked pending. But pending isn't the same as forgotten. I'd make sure of that. They locked me out, so I found another key. Rumors travel faster than truth ever could. By morning, the town had already chosen sides. The gossip wasn't whispered anymore. It was printed. A folded bulletin sat on my doorstep, crisp from the press, its black ink bleeding through thin paper. Across the front, the headline declared, "Family dispute over missing trust funds." No names, but everyone knew exactly whose story it was. Mine. The sunlight sliced through the lace curtain, cutting the room in half, bright on one side, shadowed on the other. The dust particles floated like ash in the beam, soft but relentless. The light didn't comfort me. It interrogated me. Exposure always feels holy to those who have nothing to hide. To the accused, it feels like dissection. I unfolded the paper. Words are heavier when they come from strangers. The lines between rumor and record blurred right there, printed in formal typeface, sanctioned by ink. Sources within the family confirm misuse of estate assets. My name didn't need to appear. It was already implied in every pause, every glance on the street. The phone rang once, sharp. It was her, Grace, the teacher who had spoken for me at the community meeting last week. Her voice trembled only slightly. "Don't let them shame you," she said. "This is what they do when truth gets too close." "They've put it in print," I replied. "That makes it real to everyone else." "Only if you let it stay that way," she said. "Their silence isn't your punishment. It's their defense." Her words steadied me. Grace had been a witness to my father's promises, one of the few who remembered the original ledger, the dates, the fairness. She'd stood up once when the others avoided eye contact. "Let them talk," she added quietly. "Talk fades. Paper lasts only if you let it." I hung up and turned back to the light slashing across the curtain. My breath fogged faintly against the glass. Outside, people walked slower near my gate. The same faces that had smiled during church gatherings now carried curiosity in place of kindness. Even the milkman looked twice before setting the bottle down. I folded the newspaper and tucked it into the drawer beside the window, but its weight lingered on the air. The smell of ink, sharp, metallic, seeped into the room. That was my sensory anchor now, the stinging scent of defamation disguised as fact. The curtain cord twisted around my fingers. For a moment, I wanted to pull it tight, close the world out, but I stopped. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of hiding. Instead, I opened the curtain fully. Sunlight filled the room, harsh and revealing, but mine to claim. At noon, I walked to the square. The notice board outside the post office carried another copy of the bulletin, pinned dead center. A small crowd had gathered, neighbors, shopkeepers, a few children pretending to read. The whispers fluttered like dry leaves. She took what wasn't hers. Her father must be ashamed. Money changes people. I approached slowly. No one stepped aside. I tore the bulletin down, folded it once, and slipped it into my bag. The silence afterward was heavier than any insult. They wanted humiliation. I gave them poise. Grace met me halfway, across the square. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "If I don't claim what's written about me," I said, "they'll think it's true." Her eyes softened. "You're stronger than they expect." "Not stronger," I replied. "Just done with bending." A man from the council office walked past, pretending not to notice us. His briefcase glinted in the sunlight, the brass corner flashing once before disappearing into shadow. Power doesn't always speak, it just watches, waiting for collapse. But I wasn't collapsing, I was evolving. That evening, as dusk crept through the window, I lit a single candle. The folded paper sat beside it, its edges curling from the heat. I didn't burn it, I needed it intact, for proof, for later. Instead, I wrote on its margin in small letters, "Truth delayed isn't truth denied." The flame wavered, throwing the shadow of the curtain cord against the wall. It looked like a noose at first, then like a line dividing dark from light. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Rumors may start the fire, but truth chooses when it burns. The phone buzzed again. Grace's message. "They're already talking about your visit to the square." I smiled faintly. "Good," I murmured to the empty room. "Let them talk about that." The candle flickered, its glow trembling but steady. My heart mirrored it, battered but unbroken. They wanted to isolate me, to make me shrink inside the walls of guilt. Instead, they had drawn the battle line themselves. Their words will burn louder than they think. I sent them what they feared most, a notice with my name. It wasn't rage that drove me. It was precision. After months of whispers and denials, I needed something that couldn't be twisted, a document that spoke in the language they respected. Legal weight, notarized truth. The courthouse steps were slick with rain that morning, each one reflecting the pale gray of a sky that refused to clear. I remember thinking how justice, like weather, never arrives on schedule. Inside, the clerk barely glanced up as I approached the counter. The room smelled faintly of paper dust and damp wool, an odd mix of decay and order. I placed the envelope on the counter. Heavy paper, embossed letterhead, my signature pressed firm in black ink. The arbiter I'd trusted had reviewed every word the night before, his pen scratching quietly across the margins. "This isn't just paper," he'd said. "It's a line in the sand. Once you file, you don't step back." "I have no intention of stepping back," I'd told him, "only of standing where I should have been all along." Now, as the clerk examined the form, his eyes darted between the seal and my identification. "Cease and desist," he muttered, half to himself. "Filed against a relative?" "Yes," I said. "Effective immediately." He nodded without comment, stamping the corner with the official red seal. The sound was sharper than I expected. A clean, declarative thud that seemed to echo through me. $250 in fees, the cost of reclaiming dignity. I slid the receipt into my folder, the texture of the document rough beneath my fingertips, as if the page itself carried resistance. When I stepped back outside, the rain had stopped, but the wind had not. I stood for a moment on the courthouse stairs, watching the flagpole clatter against its metal chain. Every sound felt amplified, the city's rhythm shifting as though it knew something irreversible had begun. My reflection in the courthouse window looked steadier than I felt. That was enough. That evening, I sealed another envelope, the one addressed to my brother. His name looked almost unfamiliar now, printed beside mine as opposing parties. The wax seal melted in a small crimson pool, spreading slowly before cooling into a hardened mark. I pressed my thumb against it, leaving a faint impression. My vow, silent and certain. The drive to his house felt longer than usual. Every streetlight flickered once as I passed beneath it, as if testing whether to illuminate or let me move in darkness. At his gate, I paused. The old iron bars still bore the rusted initials of our father's name. a reminder that everything we fought over was built by hands now buried. I slipped the envelope through the slot and listened to it land softly on the other side, a sound so small, yet heavier than any shout. For a moment, I waited, half expecting the door to open. It didn't. Only the wind answered, tearing slightly at the corner of the paper that had caught against the step. I reached through the bars to fix it in place. The edges fluttered, but the seal held firm. The message stood. Access withdrawn, silence ended. On the way back, I stopped at a diner near the highway. The waitress refilled my coffee twice without asking, her kindness wordless but steady. Across from me, a man read a newspaper folded neatly in half. I caught a glimpse of the headline, another story about inheritance disputes, another family torn apart by pride and paperwork. The world always finds a way to repeat itself. The clock above the counter ticked softly, each second deliberate. I watched the hands move past 9 o'clock, then 9:01, and thought how time doesn't pause for justice. It simply waits to see who shows up for it. My hands wrapped around the mug, its heat grounding me. The texture of the notice still lingered on my fingertips, the paper's grain etched into skin. That sensation was my proof, real, tangible, irreversible. I drove home under the same gray sky that had started my day. Somewhere between the courthouse and the gate, something inside me shifted. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to their moves. I was dictating them. This wasn't rebellion. It was restoration. The porch light flickered as I approached, the faint hum of electricity filling the quiet. I unlocked the door, set the empty folder on the table, and stood in stillness for a moment. The air felt different, cleaner somehow. My silence had always protected them. Tonight, it protected me. The next move would not be private. They arrived with smiles and lies rehearsed to perfection. The sound of tires crunching against the gravel reached me before the knock did. Soft, polite, the kind of sound meant to disarm. I knew better. The afternoon sun hung low, and the porch light flickered even though it wasn't needed yet, as if the house itself anticipated darkness before it came. When I opened the door, they stood there, my brother and his wife, their hands full of porcelain politeness. A tray of tea, sugar cubes glistening in the fading light. "We thought we'd talk," he said, voice warm but rehearsed. "No lawyers, no bitterness, just family." Family. The word landed heavy, like it had rusted from misuse. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. The teacups clinked against their saucers as they crossed the threshold. That sound, delicate yet sharp, had always reminded me of truce before betrayal. We sat in the parlor, a thin strip of sunlight cutting the room in half. My protector stood quietly outside the porch rail, a retired officer, a man of few words and steady eyes. He pretended to be tending the hedges, but I knew he was watching, just in case. My brother stirred his tea, slow circles that never stopped. "You've made things difficult," he said. "Filing that complaint against your own blood. The police came by this morning. You didn't have to do that." "I didn't have to," I replied, "but I did, because you left me no choice." His wife leaned forward, her voice syrupy, rehearsed. "You've misunderstood. Those transfers weren't meant to hurt you. We were just protecting the estate from outsiders." I smiled faintly. "By erasing my name from it?" Her spoon froze midair. Outside, the wind shifted. The porch bulb flickered twice, a brief pulse of warning light. My protector adjusted his stance, one silent signal, one reminder that the law, at least for now, was on my side. "You've embarrassed the family," my brother said. His words were quiet but coated with venom. "The complaint, the notice, neighbors' talk. You've turned our private matters into public spectacle." "Truth doesn't belong behind closed doors," I said. "Not anymore." He leaned closer. "Withdraw it. You still can. Say it was a misunderstanding. We'll forget all of this." "Forget?" I echoed. "You stole what wasn't yours. You lied under oath. You tried to bury a will and call it love. What exactly should I forget? He looked toward the tea set as if searching for something to control. The teaspoon clinked once against the cup, then fell still. Do you really think anyone will believe you? He asked. They'll say you're bitter, unwell, old. Let them, I said. Age doesn't erase memory. It sharpens it. A silence settled between us, thick, unyielding. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed hesitant. My protector shifted outside. I saw his shadow move against the porch post. That alone steadied me. You've made enemies, my brother whispered finally. Then they should have stayed honest, I answered. He stood too abruptly, the chair legs scraping against the floor. His wife followed, gathering her handbag with trembling fingers. We came here to make peace, she said. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said softly, but not tonight. They walked out together, their movements tight and wordless. The smell of their perfume lingered, sweet and artificial, clinging to the air like deceit that refused to fade. I followed them to the doorway. The porch bulb buzzed overhead, casting a trembling halo that stretched their shadows long across the yard. My protector nodded slightly as they passed him, a silent confirmation that the visit had been exactly what we expected, a test, not a truce. When their car finally disappeared down the road, I looked back at the table. The tea sat untouched, one cup half full, steam gone. The spoon rested beside it, a single ring of residue marking where sugar had once dissolved. I picked up the cup, its ceramic cool now, and set it beside the incident report on the counter. The formal complaint, logged and signed, reference ID neatly printed in black. Proof doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits, patient and quiet, in folders and files, biding its time until truth is forced into daylight. I turned off the porch light. The last flicker of brightness died into the night, leaving only the sound of wind against the screen door. They had come to scare me. Instead, they reminded me how fear looks when it runs out of power. Their tea went cold, and so did my mercy. The reflection told a truth I couldn't deny anymore. The mirror didn't lie. It only waited for me to stop pretending. I sat in front of the television that evening, the glow painting my living room in soft, trembling light. The air was still, except for the hum of the old lamp beside me. Then the broadcast began. My name, once whispered behind closed doors, filled the air like a verdict. The segment opened with the footage. Steady camera work, my friend's voice introducing the story. Local resident seeks justice in long-buried inheritance case, she said, her tone calm, but edged with resolve. The camera lens caught the courthouse in the background, the same place where my complaint had been stamped weeks ago. Now it wasn't paper, it was broadcast signal, carried through wires and airwaves impossible to contain. I hadn't expected to see my brother's face so soon. The clip cut to him outside his office, flanked by reporters. He smiled too easily, like someone who thought the truth could still be edited. "We're handling it privately," he said. "It's all a misunderstanding." Then the footage shifted. The testimony, the one my friend had helped record. My voice filled the room, trembling but clear. I described the missing documents, the false transfers, the laughter that had turned to cruelty. Every word felt heavier when spoken aloud. Beneath my confession, the screen flashed the proof. A still frame, time-stamped 09:47 p.m., showing my brother signing the very document he'd sworn under oath didn't exist. I hadn't realized how much power lived inside that frame. His signature was small, almost delicate, yet it carried the weight of every lie he'd told. The anchor's voice returned, measured and neutral. "The signature has been verified by a third-party analyst. Legal experts suggest the case may reopen under fraud parameters." My throat tightened. I'd braced myself for anger, denial, backlash, but not this. Relief. It wasn't triumph. It was release. The light from the TV flickered across the glass cabinet, casting my reflection between the moving images. For a moment, I saw both faces, mine and his, superimposed. Two sides of one truth, no longer hidden in silence. I wiped my eyes with the handkerchief I'd been clutching, the fabric cool and damp from tears I hadn't realized were falling. The mirror across the room caught the motion. I looked at myself through it, aged, weary, but unmistakably free. My phone buzzed beside me. Grace's message appeared first. They aired it. It's out there now. You did it. Then David's followed. Brace yourself. Calls will start soon, but you're protected. I typed back. It feels strange, like I just exhaled after years of holding my breath. The TV volume softened into background noise. The reporter's words blurred, replaced by the low hum of my heartbeat. Outside, the porch light flickered once, the same bulb that had watched every confrontation, every vow. This time, it steadied itself. Maybe it too had been waiting for the darkness to make sense. I thought about my father's handwriting, the one in the letter I'd found months earlier. His words came back to me. Fairness isn't a gift. It's a reckoning. Back then, I hadn't understood. Tonight, I did. Justice wasn't loud or quick. It was patient, like light sneaking through cracks in a locked room. A knock at the door broke the stillness. My protector's silhouette appeared against the frosted glass. When I opened it, he simply nodded. It's begun, he said quietly. Half the city's talking, the rest will by morning. They'll call it betrayal, I whispered. They'll call it truth, he said. And that's louder. We stood in silence for a moment, the sound of the night alive around us, the buzz of wires, the murmur of distant traffic, the soft flicker of porch light against his jacket. He left soon after, his car fading down the street, leaving only the faint echo of tires on wet pavement. Back inside, the broadcast replayed one final time. Frame paused again at 09:47 p.m. I reached out, touching the screen as if I could feel the ink, the paper, the moment his deception became fact. The reflection in the glass met my eyes, steady and unwavering. I whispered, "You can't erase what's recorded." The city's lights blinked through my window, restless and awake. Somewhere beyond those streets, he was watching too, seeing his own truth projected back at him for the first time. He'd built his safety on silence. Now silence belonged to me. The reflection held firm, unblinking. I let out a slow breath that trembled on the edge of peace. The city now knew what family denied. Numbers don't forgive. They simply wait. I sat across from the accountant's desk, the ledger between us, its spine cracked, its pages thick with dust and truth. The dim light above flickered once, settling into a steady hum. My fingers traced the worn edge of the cover. Every mark, every crease, felt like a confession long overdue. He cleared his throat softly. "I went through everything twice," he said. "Then once more, just to be sure." His voice carried both precision and pity. The gatekeeper who'd once locked these books away now stood beside him, silent, eyes downcast. For the first time, the numbers were open to daylight. He turned the page. 4 transfers, he said, each for $11,250. That's a total of $45,000. His pen tapped against the column as if the sound alone could make the truth more solid. All signed under your brother's authorization, all routed through the same intermediary account. My breath caught somewhere between anger and relief. "And you're certain of the signatures?" He nodded. "Verified. Cross-referenced with the original entries from last year's audit report. Reference ID 72C Finance. Everything matches." The room went quiet except for the faint scratch of his pen. The air smelled faintly of old paper and ink, a dry, metallic scent that clung to memory. The accountant slid the final page toward me. The ink was dark, deliberate. Each number balanced against its counterpart, every lie now measurable. I touched the page. The texture was uneven, where the ink had bled slightly into the paper fibers. Proof doesn't always arrive clean. It arrives honest. My voice trembled. "It's all here," I whispered. "All here," he echoed, "and all logged. You'll want copies for your records. I'll file the notarized report by morning." The gatekeeper finally spoke, his tone low, almost pleading. "I didn't know they'd gone this far. I was told to deny access, to delay you." "You did," I said quietly. "And it worked, for a while." His shoulders sagged. "I thought it was just another family dispute." "It was," I said, "until it became theft." He nodded once, the gesture small but weighted. Sometimes remorse doesn't sound like apology. It looks like silence. Learning how to breathe. Outside, the wind rattled the glass panes. The afternoon light slanted through the blinds, striping the desk in alternating bars of gold and shadow. My reflection wavered faintly on the ledger's surface, a ghost of who I'd been when this began. "This balances it," the accountant said, closing the book. "At least on paper." "Paper is where they thought I'd never reach," I said. He smiled, tired but sincere. "You've reached it now." He slid his eyeglasses off, folded them carefully, and set them beside the ledger. "You know," he added, "numbers don't hold grudges, but people do. Be prepared for the backlash." "I've lived inside their silence long enough," I said. "Noise won't scare me." He handed me the report, thick pages bound with a red clip. The stamped date in the corner glowed faintly under the light. One detail stood out. Beneath the accountant's signature, a final note read, "Verified and closed." That word, closed, felt heavier than any verdict. As I stood to leave, the gatekeeper reached for the light switch, hesitated, then looked at me. "You'll win this," he said quietly. "I don't need to win," I replied. "I just need the truth to stay written." Outside, the evening air was sharp and cool. The street smelled faintly of rain, even though the clouds hadn't broken yet. I walked with the report pressed to my chest, its weight both burden and release. Every step felt like reclaiming a fraction of what they'd stolen, not just the money, but the years of being treated as a footnote. I stopped under the flickering street lamp near the courthouse gate. The light buzzed, steadied, then glowed constant. In its halo, I opened the folder once more. The ink shimmered faintly, alive in the half-dark. 4 transfers, $45,000. Counted, confirmed, undeniable. I ran my fingers across the page, over the signature that once denied me everything. The edges of the ledger felt rough against my skin, textured like closure, imperfect but real. Their debt wasn't just owed anymore, it was proven. Their debt was now a matter of record. All seats were filled, but only truth stood upright. The courtroom pulsed with tension, a hum of whispers moving like static through the crowd. Reporters lined the benches, pens poised, eyes darting between the bench and the witness stand. The air smelled faintly of varnish and nerves, polished wood and unease blending into something electric. The clerk's voice rang out. "Case number 18B, inheritance dispute." A shuffle of papers followed. My brother sat at the defendant's table, his face composed but pale, his tie too tight against a throat that seemed to pulse with regret. I took my place near the stand, the microphone looming like a small, silent sentinel. Its metal surface gleamed under the courtroom light. The arbiter, my ally, now acting as my legal advisor, gave me a slow nod. I could tell even he felt the weight of this moment. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Proceed," she said. My brother's attorney began, voice too smooth. "Your Honor, this is a family misunderstanding. My client's intentions were—" "Intentions don't rewrite ledgers," I interrupted. The words escaped before I could stop them. Heads turned. A reporter's pen froze mid-sentence. The attorney blinked. "Mrs. Continue," the judge said, cutting him off. Her tone was calm, but her gaze was sharp as steel. He stumbled through his next argument, papers rustling like dry leaves. The transfers were for maintenance, not misappropriation. The signatures— The arbiter raised a document. Exhibit reference C12 legal. The original audit ledger, verified, notarized, and time-stamped. He handed it to the clerk. The same document his client swore never existed. A murmur rippled through the gallery. I caught sight of the gavel glinting under the overhead light, poised for order, but not yet striking. The attorney's words faltered. Perhaps a misunderstanding in the records. Or perhaps a lie repeated once too often, I said. My voice carried farther than I intended. Even the stenographer paused for half a beat before typing again. The judge leaned back slightly. "Let's hear the witness." I stepped forward. The microphone hissed as I adjusted it. My hands didn't shake this time. I unfolded the paper my father had written decades earlier, a note retrieved from the estate box, yellowed at the edges, but intact. "I'd like to read a line," I said softly. "It was written by the man whose legacy we stand here to divide." The room went still. Only the faint ticking of the courtroom clock marked time. I read aloud, "Divide with fairness or divide in shame." The words echoed longer than they should have. In that silence, every lie, every manipulation, every stolen signature felt smaller, insignificant beside the gravity of those 8 words. My brother shifted in his seat. He didn't look up. For the first time, his hands clasped together, not in defense, but in something closer to prayer. The judge spoke quietly. "You have both carried this too long, but the law doesn't weigh emotion. It weighs evidence, and what I see here is imbalance corrected." I met her eyes and nodded. All I ever wanted was acknowledgement, not wealth, truth. Behind me, the murmurs began again. A woman whispered something about courage, another about family. The gavel struck once, its sound sharp and final, echoing through the chamber like a breaking spell. Reporters stood, scribbling furiously. The arbiter leaned toward me and whispered, "It's done. You did it." But I wasn't sure. Justice isn't instant. It lingers, waiting to be believed. I looked toward the crowd, at faces that once judged me, now uncertain, some even softened by guilt. My brother finally rose, slow and unsteady. He turned toward me, but said nothing. For a fleeting moment, our eyes met. His were red, not from anger, but from knowing there was no hiding left. The judge's voice cut through the room. "The court will recess until the formal verdict is entered, but let it be known, truth, once recorded, doesn't erase." As I stepped away from the stand, the microphone caught a faint echo of my breath, the sound feeding back softly before fading into silence. That small, trembling hum felt like the last ghost leaving the room. The arbiter handed me a copy of the official transcript, bound, sealed, permanent. My name printed beside the words, "Plaintiff Statement, verified and recorded." It felt heavier than paper, heavier even than victory. Outside the courthouse doors, I could already hear the crowd gathering, voices blending into something that sounded almost like applause, almost like absolution. I took one final look back at the room where lies had finally met daylight. The gavel still rested on its block, the light above it steady now. All seats were filled, but only truth stood upright. The verdict would echo louder than the mockery. By dawn, justice had a signature. The street was still, painted in that half-light between night and morning, when even truth seems to hesitate before speaking. I stood at the gate, breath steady, watching the court officer press the notice flat against the wooden door. The paper's edges curled in the breeze, but the ink was dark, deliberate. Beneath the seal, the words read like a quiet redemption. Transfer of property rights under Section 41B. My protector stood beside me, hands tucked in his coat pockets. "It's done," he said, voice low but certain. "They can contest, but they can't undo this." The morning light caught on the courthouse seal stamped in red, a small circle of authority that had taken years to earn. For a moment, I couldn't move. The sound of the paper rustling felt louder than any argument we'd ever had. Across the street, a curtain shifted. Neighbors peered through narrow gaps, half curious, half afraid to be seen watching. Their silence was a kind I understood, witnesses who had always known but never spoken. I exhaled. "Funny," I said. "I thought I'd feel victorious." He looked at me, studying the way my fingers traced the edge of the notice. And now? I just feel done. The word lingered, heavy but calm. The porch door creaked softly as the breeze brushed past it, carrying the faint smell of damp earth. Somewhere down the lane, a church bell tolled 7 times. The sound folded into the quiet, steady, and sure, like the universe marking the hour my war ended. I stepped closer to the notice. The seal glowed faintly under the sunlight. Official, undeniable. My name was printed clearly, next to the judges, side by side, as if justice and endurance had finally learned to share space. He glanced toward the house. "Do you want to go in?" I shook my head. "Not yet. Let the morning breathe first." He nodded. "You waited this long." "I waited half a lifetime," I said. "Another hour won't hurt." We stood there in silence. Even the birds seemed careful with their songs. Behind that door was everything that had once been ours, every argument, every letter, every secret buried under family charm. The walls had heard it all. My brother's laughter turned to lies, my mother's silence turned to complicity, and now a thin white page held it accountable. The protector adjusted his stance, watching the way the wind tugged gently at the notice. "You'll need a locksmith," he said after a pause. "I already called one," I replied. "He's coming at 9. He smiled faintly. "Efficient, as always. I learned from the best." The light shifted again, sliding across the porch until it touched my shoes. Dawn had finally claimed the night. The court's language, once cold and distant, now felt almost human. Words like possession, execution, transfer. They had carried cruelty once. Today, they carried closure. My protector handed me a folded copy of the order. "Keep this," he said. "It's yours to hold." I took it carefully, feeling the texture of the paper, stiff, grainy, the kind that resists folding. Proof has weight when it's earned. He looked toward the neighboring house, where 2 figures stood behind a window, watching. "They'll talk," he said. "They already did," I answered. "Now they'll talk about something real." He nodded, a quiet acknowledgement that this was more than victory. It was vindication dressed in sunlight. When he left, I stayed behind, standing at the gate as the breeze lifted the edges of the notice once more. The paper flapped softly, almost rhythmic, like the breathing of something set free. I reached out, smoothing it down, and caught my reflection faintly in the glass pane beside the door. There were no tears left, no fury either, just the calm that comes after every storm that's had its say. The light stretched longer across the porch, golden and forgiving. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like an accusation. It felt still. I whispered, "It's over." The notice didn't move, but its presence said everything my heart couldn't yet. The street remained quiet, but not empty. Somewhere, a window shut softly. Somewhere else, a new day began. The wind carried the faintest echo of paper and peace. The house finally belonged to silence and me. They watched as I stepped through the same door they'd barred. The front gate creaked open like it remembered every time it had been slammed in my face. Reporters stood clustered near the hedge, microphones poised, eyes glinting with curiosity, disguised as empathy. Flashbulbs snapped in the morning haze, scattering light across the old stone steps like confetti, for a victory no one dared name aloud. The air inside smelled faintly of polish and dust, the scent of something preserved for too long. The chandelier above me flickered once, its crystals trembling as if recognizing my footsteps. Each glint caught the morning light and threw it back at the room like tiny shards of truth. My brother stood by the staircase. His voice was low, almost rehearsed. "This is still your home." I looked around at the faded portraits, the furniture polished to impress strangers, the walls that had swallowed years of silence. "It always was," I said quietly. He tried to smile, but it faltered halfway. "I didn't think you'd come back with all this." He gestured toward the cameras, the murmuring crowd just beyond the door. "They came for the truth," I said, "not for me." The chandelier dimmed and steadied again, its light finding the dust motes that danced between us, slow, unhurried, free. Outside, the press whispered, their words leaking through the open door. The rightful owner returns. My witness, the teacher who'd once spoken on my behalf, stood near the steps with folded arms, silent but present. The same local station that had aired my story now filmed this quiet aftermath. The broadcast feed showed the house behind me, its doorway, its windows, its long shadow stretching across the drive. I ran a hand over the brass door knocker. It was colder than I remembered, its weight familiar. I could still see the faint outline of the notice that had once been nailed there, the same one they'd torn down before pretending nothing had changed. But the mark remained, faint but visible, like a scar the wood refused to heal. He cleared his throat. It wasn't supposed to go this far. It always goes this far when lies grow legs, I said. His eyes met mine, no longer sharp, just tired. So what now? You've won. What's left? Accountability, I said, and silence. Silence? I nodded. You taught me how loud denial can be. I'd rather hear nothing at all. For a long moment we just stood there, the house breathing around us, the chandelier humming softly, the faint sound of reporters adjusting their cameras drifting in from outside. He looked toward the window. They'll think we're monsters. They'll think right, I said. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't expect forgiveness. Good, I said. It isn't here to give. The witness stepped inside, holding her phone up. It's airing live, she whispered. They're saying justice has a new address. The irony stung. I hadn't wanted headlines. I'd wanted acknowledgement. But perhaps this was the only language the world listened to, stories with endings neat enough to applaud. I turned to the crowd at the threshold, their faces blurred in the glare. But I could hear them, clapping softly, some recording, some wiping tears. The applause was gentle, respectful. For once, the noise wasn't cruel. My brother's shoulders slumped. Do you feel better? I thought about it. The ledger balanced. The court sealed the verdict. The House returned. The truth broadcast. Yet beneath it all, something hollow still echoed. No, I said, just lighter. He looked down, as if that weight had passed to him. Then maybe that's fair. The chandelier's glow steadied, warm and even now. The dust hung still in the beam, tiny worlds caught midair, suspended between what was broken and what survived. I walked past him, through the corridor lined with portraits. My reflection shimmered faintly in the glass frames, overlapping with the faces of those who came before us. I whispered, more to them than to him, this was never about revenge. It was about remembering. Outside, the cameras caught the door closing slowly behind me. The applause faded into a hush that felt almost sacred. The house stood quiet again, as if exhaling after years of holding its breath. Peace arrived, but not forgiveness. Stillness has its own sound when you've fought enough. The house was quiet again, but not hollow. Every echo had softened into something gentler, something earned. Outside, the sky carried the gray tint of early morning rain. The scent of roses drifted in through the open window, faint, wet, and familiar. Father's scent. His roses had survived every storm, every season of neglect, as if loyalty could bloom from roots alone. The garden bench still leaned slightly to one side. I sat there, the title deed resting on my lap, its weight unreal for what it meant. Ownership didn't feel like victory. It felt like permission to breathe without apology. The arbiter arrived just after 8. His shoes left neat marks on the gravel, the kind of precision that came from long years of witnessing too much. He held out a folded envelope. Final verification copy, he said simply. All entries updated. I took it, tracing the embossed seal with my thumb. So it's truly done. It's done, he replied. Then, after a pause, you did what most wouldn't. You stayed. I didn't know how to leave, I said. Not until now. He nodded once, respectful, and glanced at the garden. He must have loved this place. He did, even when it loved him back unevenly. The arbiter smiled faintly, not understanding, but sensing the weight behind it. "Keep the papers safe," he said. "They're proof enough for anyone who forgets." "I won't need to show them," I said. "The land remembers." He looked at me for a long moment, then turned toward his car. The sound of the engine starting faded. Down the road, swallowed by the rain beginning again. I stayed on the bench. The roses gleamed under the drizzle, drops clinging to their edges like tears refusing to fall. I breathed in, slow and steady. Rain mixed with soil, the scent of renewal. Inside, I'd already begun repainting. The pale walls had turned a softer shade of ivory. Each stroke of the brush buried a memory, the laughter that hid cruelty, the meals that masked manipulation, the signatures forged with smiles. Paint covered everything, but didn't erase it. It only sealed it in, layer by layer, until remembrance hurt less. On the counter lay the new key ring, 3 identical keys, clean, unbent, silver. I ran them through my fingers, the metal cold and smooth. Each one a quiet declaration. This place answers to me now. I opened the back door to let the scent of rain drift inside. The air carried a damp sweetness. Somewhere a window latch clicked against the frame, a steady rhythm in the silence, as though the house itself was remembering how to breathe. There was peace in that rhythm, fragile but real. I walked through the hallway, trailing my hand along the wall. The paint was still drying, cool to the touch. Beneath it, I could almost feel the pulse of the years, echoes trapped inside timber and stone. I whispered, "You can rest now." The whisper wasn't for the house alone. In the living room, the title deed lay open beside a cup of tea gone lukewarm. My name printed cleanly across the page, above a judge's neat signature. No more disputes, no more claims. The document was a monument to survival, not triumph. Outside, the rain eased. The garden glistened under a weak light breaking through the clouds. I stepped out once more, letting the air touch my face. The bench, the roses, the old fence, all carried stories, but none accused anymore. "Peace," I murmured. "You took your time." A faint breeze stirred the leaves, brushing past like an answer. I stood there a while longer, until the quiet no longer felt like emptiness, but arrival. The roses' scent deepened as the sun reached them, a soft perfume rising from the soil, steady and forgiving. I thought of every hand that once tried to hold power here, every voice that used silence as a weapon. They had all gone quiet, one by one, but the place remained, rebuilt, honest, breathing in its own rhythm again. Some stories don't end in justice or forgiveness. They end in reclamation, in learning to exist without rage. I turned the key once more in the new lock, listening to the click echo softly down the hall. The sound was small, but absolute. But stories like ours never fade entirely. I boxed the proof not to forget, but to rest. The morning light slanted through the library windows, soft and colorless, the kind that neither warms nor wounds. I stood at the counter, the archive box open before me, a simple container, yet heavier than any burden I had carried before. Inside lay the fragments of years that once tore me apart. Court orders, transcripts, property documents, handwritten statements, all folded into quiet submission. The librarian adjusted her glasses. "Each document will be cataloged under the Family Proceedings Archive," she said gently. "It becomes part of public record now, permanent." The word struck something in me. Permanent. Not victory, not even peace, just permanence. A kind of truth that no one could rewrite again. I ran my fingers along the edge of one document. The texture had roughened with time, its paper fibers soft but unyielding. Every crease told of the hands that had touched it, some with deceit, some with duty. I wasn't angry anymore. I only wanted memory to have a home. The witness stood beside me, her presence a quiet reminder of how far I had come. "You sure about sealing it?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "It's not for them to see anymore. It's for time." She nodded. "Then let time do its work." The librarian brought over a narrow strip of blue ribbon. "Would you like to tie it yourself?" she asked. I hesitated. "Yes." I lifted the ribbon, its silk cool between my fingers. As I tied the knot around the box lid, I realized how strange it was, that closure could sound like the soft slide of fabric tightening into a bow. "Your entry reference is R2145, the librarian said, jotting the code neatly in her register. "If ever you wish to view the file again, this number will retrieve it." "I won't," I replied, "but it should know it's not forgotten." She smiled faintly. "Then it's safe." The box made a hollow sound as she placed it onto the metal shelf behind the counter. Row after row of other boxes surrounded it, each one a story, once unbearable, now folded into history. I lingered there, looking at the small printed label. Family Proceedings, Year 2023. That was all it said. No names, no blame, just a category, a year, and the quiet endurance that lived between them. The witness whispered, "It's strange, isn't it, that after everything, it all comes down to paper." "Paper lasts longer than denial," I said, "and it doesn't need forgiveness to stay." We walked toward the exit together. The smell of old paper trailed after us, faint and comforting, like rain settling into soil. Outside, the afternoon air carried the weightless hush of finality. The courthouse stood across the square, distant, still, no longer menacing. I glanced at it once, not with anger, but acknowledgement. That building had heard my truth. The rest was up to the world. The witness stopped beside me. "Do you ever wonder what they'll think when they read it, years from now?" I smiled, slow and tired. "Maybe they'll see it wasn't about vengeance. Maybe they'll understand that justice isn't always loud." She nodded. "You wrote your ending in ink." "No," I said, "in memory." We parted ways near the steps. I looked back once more at the library door, where the light caught the faintest reflection of the ribbon's blue. It shimmered for a heartbeat before the door closed, sealing it inside. Walking home, I carried nothing with me, no papers, no proof, no bitterness. Only the quiet awareness that legacy doesn't need to shout, it only needs to remain. At the gate, I paused. The roses had begun to bloom again, pale and fragrant, the scent rising just enough to reach me. I thought of Father's hands pruning them each spring, steady and patient. He used to say, "Everything worth keeping takes time to root." He was right. I turned the key in the lock, the sound crisp and final. Somewhere behind me, in a building filled with forgotten truths, a single box waited, sealed, catalogued, remembered. Memory has a longer reach than blood. This time, the table held only truth. The cloth was the same one that had covered so many years of arguments and false toasts, but tonight it looked different. Whiter somehow, soft under the glow of a single candle. I ran my hand across it, tracing the faint wrinkles that no ironing could remove. They weren't flaws anymore. They were proof of endurance. A year had passed since the notice on the door, since the last signature turned final. Time had folded itself into quiet rhythms. The garden was steady again, the roses in bloom. The house, once echoing with accusation, now hummed softly with peace. The protector arrived first, carrying a small box. "For you," he said, placing it near the center of the table. I opened it carefully. A framed photograph, restored and bright. My father standing by the porch steps. The same image that once sat hidden in a drawer, its glass cracked, its meaning ignored. Now it gleamed under the candlelight, whole again. "Looks right here," he said. "Yes," I whispered. "He belongs at the table." Soon, others joined. Neighbors, the witness, even the old accountant who had once guarded the ledgers like holy scripture. We weren't bound by blood, only by memory. The air smelled faintly of baked bread and lemon polish. Someone laughed softly. It wasn't the loud, careless laughter I remembered from the old days. It was real. I poured tea into 6 cups. "There used to be 12, I murmured, and the protector looked up. "You filled the empty ones with truth," he said simply. That line stayed with me. I lifted my cup, not for a toast, but acknowledgement. "To those who stayed," I said, "and to those who left before learning how to." The candle flickered once, the flame leaning toward the photograph. For a moment, it almost looked like my father was smiling back. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. It belonged here now. I remembered the night I'd once whispered into the dark, "They laughed," but I remember. Back then, it sounded like defiance. Tonight, it sounded like peace. The witness smiled faintly. "You've rebuilt something they couldn't destroy." "Not rebuilt," I said. "Reclaimed." We ate quietly, sharing small stories. Nothing grand, just life as it had settled. The clock ticked softly behind us. I'd stopped resenting its rhythm. It no longer counted loss, only presence. After dessert, I rose to clear the table. The protector tried to help, but I shook my head. "Let me," I said. "It feels right to do it myself." The plates were warm in my hands, the tablecloth smooth beneath my fingertips. The fabric caught a bit of wax that had dripped from the candle, sealing a memory I wouldn't wash out. Outside, the sky turned violet, the last light stretching across the windows, like forgiveness. The protector lingered by the door. "You know," he said, "not many people get to rewrite their ending." "I didn't rewrite it," I replied. "I just finished it." He smiled. "And they'll remember you for that." "Let them," I said, "as long as they remember the truth with me." When everyone left, I sat alone for a while. The candle burned low, its flame steady but small. The photograph gleamed faintly in its frame, the light touching his face just enough to make him seem alive again. I leaned back in the chair, the house around me calm and whole. For the first time, I didn't feel haunted by its history. I felt held by it. I blew out the candle, watching the thin line of smoke rise and fade into the air. They mocked my silence. Now it speaks louder than them.